Our time, Bangkok time. It's a structural transformation, so.
Yes, I've made a note of it.
So Arati, I think it's 9 o'clock here. We can get started. Our entire panel is here. So just on logistics, what we could do is at the beginning, we could have the videos turned on for myself, Harry and Arati and Sweta. And then once we finish, we will turn our videos off and it will be over to our 4 panelists. Does that sound good? Over to you.
Okay, great. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, wherever in the world you might be. Welcome, and we're so grateful to have you here for the 2021-2022 Human Development Report Regional Consultation on Uncertain Times, Unsettled Lives, and Transformation in the Asia Pacific. My name is Ravi Krishnan. I'm the Strategic Foresight Advisor for UNDP, the Regional Bureau of Asia Pacific, and it is my deep privilege to be here today to moderate a fantastic conversation on this topic. To begin with, we're going to have some fantastic opening statements by a few colleagues to help set the scene for us. So first, I would love to introduce Mr. Heriberto Tapia, who is the Research and Strategic Partnership Advisor of the Human Development Report Office, the HDRO, at UNDP, leading in both areas. He has been a senior member of the HDRO research team since 2014 and has also been a lecturer at Columbia University in New York, the University of Chile in Santiago, and the University Diego Portales in Santiago as well. I would also love to introduce Sweta Saxena, who is the chief in the Macroeconomic Policy and Financing for Development Division at the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, UNESCAP, in Bangkok, Thailand. She has led 3 flagship reports at ESCAP, the 2019 Ambitions Beyond Growth, 2020 Towards Sustainable Economies, and in 2021 Towards Post-COVID-19 Resilience Economies. To begin with, I would love to invite Harry to first say a few words to welcome all of us into the session, and then we will hand over to Sweta for her comments as well. Thank you, Harry. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Arati. It's my pleasure to be here, and I thank the organizers, UNESCAP. We're very happy to be here. All the people that are following us. Because for us this is very important to talk and discuss about what we are writing and what is going to be the next Human Development Report. We are in early stages, so I think this is the right time to have this conversation. We are talking about uncertain times and uncertain lives, and this has a lot to do with actually what is going to happen today, this conversation, because things are changing quite dramatically in the way we are looking at development, and some of these that are going to be made introduce some level of uncertainty. In the last Human Development Report, we were talking about the empty box. So when we look at the development of countries, we see that no country now is in the space where very high human development, and at the same time low pressures on the planet. So in a way, there is some sense of impossibility given current patterns of production and consumption. So we need to find the way to get into this empty box, and the journey is going to be uncertain because we need to create the pathway, not only from the point of view of the developed countries, but also from the point of view of the developing countries. When we started talking about development in 1990, the Human Development Index, somehow we saw a journey from developing to developed. Now the journey is very different. We need to, in a way, redefine development, but also redefine the policy toolkit to get to this new space. So I think it's a very challenging task. I'm happy to be part of this and to engage with you. So looking forward to the discussion that we will have in the next couple of hours. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eri, for those opening remarks. And it's my thrill to also now introduce Ms. Sweta Saxena for her opening comments.
Thanks, Aarti. Harry just said everything there is to say. We are redefining development. We are redefining policy. And in fact, it's been our pleasure at ESCAP to host this session at our own expert group meeting, which is about how to build a fairer world. So the topics that you're going to be discussing in the next 2 hours are something that are very close to our heart. We've tried to change the conversation, redefine development, putting sustainable development at the center of economic policy making. So we are trying to do exactly the same thing that you are analyzing. So I'll just leave it at that. And I'm the only one basically being in between you and the really great discussion that we're going to have over the next 2 hours. So thank you and welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Sweta. Thank you, Harry. My great privilege now to introduce the wonderful Tasneem Mirza. Tasneem is an economist working as well at the Human Development Report Office of UNDP as a researcher. She holds a PhD in economics and is the co-author of the Human Development Report. Tasneem joins us today to talk to us about this next HDR and what we can expect from it, and to draw the transitions and into the discussions we're going to be having with our wonderful panelists. Tasneem, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sweta. I'm trying to share my screen now. Can you see it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Okay, I will get started. Welcome, colleagues, to the Asia-Pacific Consultation on the Human Development Report. We are here to seek your guidance and advice as we are in the course of the development of this report. We're very much writing it, so we're open to the direction it can go. This is part of a series of consultations that is taking place right now around the globe. We recently concluded the consultations in Latin America and the Caribbean, in the Arab states, and also in Europe. Tomorrow we have the consultation in Africa. We're also hosting some thematic consultations on different topics covering migration, South-South cooperation, LGBTQI, and more. So let me get started, and my idea is to give you a little bit about the topic of this year's next year's report. And we are, as Harry has mentioned, we are building it off of the last 2 years of report. In 2019, we worked a little bit on inequality. In 2020, we focused on human development in the Anthropocene. And this year, we're taking it a little bit further to look into the various angles of uncertainty that it poses and how it redefines human development. So here we have a chart from the latest report of the IPCC that shows how the course of global temperatures has been increasing far greater due to human activities as compared to what it would have been under a natural course. This is also having many knock-on effects. As you know, we are seeing increased incidence of natural disasters. We are seeing significant biodiversity loss, ocean acidification, and many other planetary boundaries that are being exceeded. So now we have a very short window of opportunity to meet the Paris Agreement, but at the same time we know that our climate has changed in fundamental ways and will continue to change, which means our future ecological system becomes more and more unpredictable. So this means that the historical data and the traditional risk assessments are going to be less accurate for us to make projections about the future, to understand a very uncertain future. And in fact, it may drive human behaviors and investments that adds to the problem than solving it. The other point is that we have to consider human development as very much part of the planetary system. The human development journey is very much part of the environment. We are part of nature. Humans are part of the biosphere. And so we cannot separate the two. We are very much part of the solution in the Anthropocene as much as we are driving it. So here we talk a little bit about the various angles of this. So the social imbalances are exacerbating the planetary pressures, and we talked a little bit about that in last year's report. We are in the situation we are in because of the social imbalances in our society, and as we exceed planetary boundaries, it is in fact deepening inequality. At the same time, small perturbations are having system-wide effects and making our various ecological systems reach tipping points. And we are seeing that in many cases. Consider, for example, what is happening in the Amazon forest. Scientists are saying that it is in the verge of moving from a rainforest to a savanna. At the same time, if you consider the mangrove forest, and if it stops to stand where it does, it could have multiple impacts for our living. On the right, we have an image of the tip of an iceberg, which we're seeing different events such as the pandemic, but underlying this are various drivers such as how humans are penetrating into the animal habitat, which is increasing the incidence of zoonotic diseases. So in a way, we have to understand the deep patterns of human behavior and the way our societies are structured to see what are driving some of these events. So building upon this uncertainty that is there in the Anthropocene, we are in the process of going through many transitions. We would like to transition to a more stable climate state, which means we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and our material footprint. And the report focuses a little bit on some of these transitional uncertainties. So these uncertainties basically are whether we will be able to reduce or contain the increases in global temperatures on time, what would be the implications for the finance and economy as we shift to a low carbon path, who would be the winners and losers, and will there be climate justice? What are the risks and uncertainties of the political economy, as well as the growing distrust in institutions? So how will all of that play out as we try to transition to a more preferred future in the Anthropocene? So here we talk a little bit about the energy transitions that are taking place. There's significant energy transitions that are happening around the world. We are moving to renewable energy at a great speed. By 2040, it is anticipated that renewable sources of energy would become the most dominant source of energy. Obviously, this is happening at different speeds in different countries, and the time and speed of the energy transitions will also play out in terms of uncertainties for individuals and economies. There is also significant policy uncertainty. Countries are imposing different carbon pricing, different mechanisms for mitigation, and how they are undertaken imposes different uncertainty for the private sector. Also, our economic models were built under a stable climate regime, which means many of our long-term assets, such as pensions, are tied to carbon-intensive industries. And as we make shift away from those industries, that will have huge implications for the finance and economy and implications for employment and income. There is also a significant mineral cost of renewables. The solar panels that we're building, the wind panels require significant metals and minerals, which means that mining will intensify in the coming years. In the next 20 years, it is anticipated that mining will have to increase 4 to 6 times if we are to meet the 2°C goal of the Paris Agreement, because that is how much renewable energy will need to expand. And obviously, increase in mining also has implications for biodiversity loss, deforestation, and particularly for Asia Pacific, many of the key biodiversity sites overlap with the mining sites, and so there are many other considerations we have to look into as we expand renewable energy. The next slide is about looking at the material footprint. So new data came out in 27 on the material footprint, which provides much more greater insights onto what is happening. Material footprint has been increasing at an exponential rate at the global level. In the last 25 years, we have doubled the material footprint. Last year, we reached 100 billion tons of material footprint per year, which is extremely greater than what we have seen in the past. And also, when we look across countries, we see that very high human development countries have disproportionately larger material footprint, which tells us this is a model of advancement and development that we cannot follow. And as income grows in the low and medium HDI countries, and as their population grows, there is a high risk of increasing material footprint. And therefore, alternative models of development are being considered. In this chart, we also see how in the last 50 years, the share of the material footprint in Asia Pacific has increased a lot compared to other parts of the world. There are various schools of thought as to what needs to be done about that. One is that whether we are able to decouple GDP from resource use. That is, as GDP increases, are we able to contain our growth of resource use? The latest research shows that there is no empirical evidence that says that we have been able to decouple GDP from resource use in the absolute sense at the global level, and be able to also do it fast enough. This moves us to other movements, such as the movement on degrowth, the literature on A growth, that says we need to move away from limitless growth strategies, and also green growth. Some researchers say green growth is not an option because it still assumes positive GDP growth. There are experts who look closely into the consumption, because consumption is now being presented more as affluence, because the greater part of consumption is coming from the very high income countries, and which is not necessarily meeting the basic needs. And therefore, consumption is mostly overconsumption and affluence, which needs to be reduced. Behavioral scientists and psychologists also say that very high materialism is not associated with positive well-being. So as we try to understand this behavior of consumption, high overconsumption, and this culture, we are moving more into transdisciplinary areas of research, which helps us understand what really drives human behavior and societal behavior. So what I have explained so far is the kinds of uncertainty that is being presented in context of the Anthropocene and the transitions, which covers the first part of the report as we are writing it. And the second part focuses more on how that's unsettling lives. Here we focus a little bit on how the impact on mental well-being. We have seen this in course of the pandemic, but also much more generally that we are having negative impacts on the mental well-being. Also, that research shows that increases in consumption, increases in income is not necessarily having a positive impact on mental well-being. This chart shows how, this graph shows how external stressors has an impact not only on the brain and the nervous system, but across the body, impacting cardiovascular system, the immune system, and so forth. So in a way, we cannot think of positive human development without considering the impact on the mental well-being. Here we also look at how technologies in the background of all of this is playing a role towards human development. The capability approach suggests that technology could be an enabler in many ways, providing opportunities, more opportunities, but there are also many challenges with technology. So we explored this a little bit in the course of the report. We're talking about, for example, vaccines that have come in a very short time, has been very successful. But also how technology and the way we research is having an impact on polarization and polarization of views across people. In the last part of the report, we think about how can we open horizons for change, looking into different policy regimes that go beyond the existing tools that we have. At present, we have for carbon mitigation, for example, we look into our main tools such as carbon pricing policies, removal of fossil fuels, and various collaboration mechanisms and various policies the government implements. And many of these assume a rational individual. As in economics, we assume they will have a rational choice. But if we start looking into other aspects of what really drives human choices, we see that many other factors play a role. Going into behavioral sciences, psychology, anthropology, history, culture, we see that emotions and many other factors play a role in individual choices as well as societal choices and societal values. So in a way, if we expand our understanding of what really drives individuals and societies, we will need to start looking into many other disciplines, which could then give us ideas for how can we design policies that take into consideration this multifaceted behavior at the individual level and at the societal level. And it can give us further ideas of how can we collaborate better, how can we strengthen collective agency through which we can direct humans to a more desired future in the Anthropocene. So let me finish here and invite our the panel discussions. Over to you, Arati.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic introduction and overview of the next Human Development Report. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists. So first of all, just before we get into that, I'd just like to advise, we will be asking our panelists a series of questions related to the Human Development Report and their areas of expertise. If you have any questions for the panelists yourself, please feel free to put that into the chat function, and our team will be monitoring the chat function and will be able to draw on your questions to ask the panelists. We will be going for about the next 1 hour with our panelists, and then we will open it up for Q&A. You will also have an opportunity during that last Q&A section to put your hand up and and you can ask your questions directly to our panelists. But if you don't want to do that, as a reminder, please type your questions into the chat function. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our fantastic group of panelists who have joined us today. So first we have Mr. Kaisuke Nansai, who is the head of the International Material Cycles section at the Center for Material Cycles and Waste Management Research of the National Institute for Environmental Studies. His expertise includes environmental input-output analysis, including global material flows, greenhouse gases, and industrial ecology. He is also an adjunct professor at the Graduate School of Environmental Studies at Nagoya University in Japan. As an intellectual historian of Japan, Professor Julia Thomas writes about concepts of nature and the Anthropocene, political thought, historiography, and photography as a political practice. Her most recent books are The Anthropocene, A Multidisciplinary Approach, a co-edited collection, Visualizing Fascism, the 20th Century Rise of the Global Right, and Strata and Three Stories. And she also has two more books in the works that will be coming out. Our next panelist is Mr. Ravi Agarwal, who is the founder-director of Toxic Links, an environmental NGO based in New Delhi and working on areas of chemical safety, toxics, and waste for over 25 years. He has been part of several government standards and regulatory committees and participates in UNEP, EU, WHO forums, and related international conventions. Ravi is also an established artist, writer, and curator working with photographs, video installation, and public art. And finally, we are thrilled to have Dr. Renzo Arguinto, MD, who is an associate professor of public and planetary health at Sunway University in Malaysia. He is concurrently an associate professor and inaugural director of the Planetary and Global Health Program in St. Luke's Medical Center College of Medicine in the Philippines. An Obama Asia Pacific leader and Aspen Institute New Voices Fellow, Dr. Guinto sits in several international boards, including the Lancet Planetary Health, Global Health 50/50, and Climate Cares, as well as in 2 Lancet commissions on One Health and population health post-COVID-19. Welcome, everybody, Dr. Guinto, Ravi, Dr. Thomas, and Mr. Kaizuke. We're thrilled to have you with us. So to begin with, I'm going to pose a series of questions to our wonderful panelists, and we're going to take this directly. So Mr. Nansai, Dr. Nansai, first of all, to you. As the head of the International Material Cycle section at the National Institute for Environmental Studies, we would love to hear more on this topic. How do you see this topic being reflected in this next HDR report? Can you share some experiences from Japan on sustainable practices of material cycles and waste?
Okay, so thank you very much for having me to this fantastic event as a panelist. I'm very honored to be here. So, okay. Thank you for the first give me the first chance to reply your question. So, I think the environmental burden of human activity has exceeded the Earth's environment carrying capacity already, and it's beginning to have a reversible effect on the Earth's natural systems already. And in the Anthropocene we are talking now, where the impacts are often unclear. That's why I think it is very important for your report to focus on the greenhouse gas emissions, where its impact is well understood relatively by science. And also the material footprint, which shows that the direct and indirect material consumption as the key drivers of the other environmental impact threatening the planetary health. And that's why I very much would support to your new report focusing on the two environmental the key aspects. Regarding Japan's experience on the waste and material use. So as you know, the Japan is a very small island. That's why it doesn't have enough area for landfilling waste. Therefore, currently, about 80% of the municipal waste treatment is by incineration. This is because the importance of the volume reduction of waste for the small area of Japan, and for the hygiene treatment to reduce the smell anyway, toxicity. Then also in Japan, that the waste incineration is often accompanied by the power generation facilities to recover energy from some plastic in the municipal waste, or anyway the fuel for burning the waste. Then the greenhouse gas emission per unit of electricity generated by waste power are currently lower than the unit greenhouse gas emission for electricity of other thermal power generation, like a coal plant or anyway. This means the currently waste power generation has been contributing to the reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions currently. But in short, we could say so far, waste management in Japan has been optimized within a system boundary of waste treatment itself. However, we are expecting now renewable energies become the base of power generation in the future for achieving the net zero society, which means the advantage of the West power generation in terms of carbon reduction will disappear soon. And we understand that we are at the turning point where what we used to consider to be a sustainable practice is no longer from now. Waste management also needs to play a decarbonizing role as a part of the overall system for production and consumption in Japan, not but just a narrow system boundary of waste treatment, waste management. That's the big, I'll say, the transition, and also this is a very big challenge, which Japan has to focus on right now. That's my point for the West issues. Then, if I can refer to some material cycles, so we collect waste by multiple categories, such as plastic, PET bottles, cans, bottles, papers, clothing, spray cans separately, a lot. The system is such that the waste is separated by person who put it out, not by the business waste collector. There is a lot of effort to separate rubbish. It's made in Japan by putting several bins in the small houses in Japan. Even though in my house I have, 8 boxes for separating the rubbish. Therefore, currently the collection rate of the waste is very high. Collection rate. However, there has been no significant change in Japan's per capita material consumption, material footprint, as the previous slide shows already. This implies that although we have paid our attention so far to recycle materials, the reduction of material consumption, which is the most important aspect of the circular economy, has not been considered yet. That's what I'm thinking about the Japanese situation regarding material cycle and waste. Thank you.
Much, Dr. Nansei, for such a wonderfully reflective contribution. Ravi, I would love to come to you next as an environmental activist and the founder of your organization. How has your work helped raise awareness at the local level? Can such initiatives have an impact on social norms? And just to remind everybody, Mr. Agarwal is the founder of the NGO Toxics Link that has increased awareness on chemical safety, toxics and waste, and the recycling sector in India. So yes, Ravi, just over to you. We're really interested to understand how such initiatives have an impact on social norms and how it actually raises awareness in society.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I come from an unusual position of being part of a research-based initiative on toxicity, but also as an artist who for 30 years has been looking at how communities interact with ecosystems and how these things interface. So just as an outset, I'd just like to make 2 short comments and then get you more details. One is that from my overall understanding, I've seen that we are very focused on particular changes in the environment. We are unable to or not in a capacity to look at systemic changes. We don't see interactions. So we do see, for example, I can tell you about lead in paints or lead in the air, or I can tell you about mercury in fish, but I cannot tell you very easily, because we are not focusing on that question of how people interact with that fish, how people interact with those landscapes through which food comes. And as an artist, I focus a lot on those communities. And in the recent past, I've interacted with 4 such communities. One is the fishing community in South India, the fishing community in Havana, Cuba, looking at desert community in Jaisalmer, who are looking at water systems, where there's a big technological in a canal there to get water in, and also looking at urban spaces where recycling, electronic waste, landfills are part of an informal sector situation. So, so that's the first comment, that how do we get the capacity to look at systemic interaction? I think that's a big challenge we have today. The second is, when we look at things like toxicity, we are looking at individual toxicity. So, for example, Toxics Link over the last 30 years has had the fortune to impact a lot of the framework in which toxic and waste exists in India. So we've been part of at least 7 or 8 national legislations since the 90s, starting from municipal waste to hospital waste to electronic waste, etc. And very often, like in electronic waste, the first report which came out from India was in 2006, which was a report we did, looking again from systems on the ground. It was looking at how things are changing in the recycling sector, what new materials are appearing, that we raised this issue of what are these new materials which are appearing in 2006, which led to this idea of. So there is an overall chemicalization, and as we know from HDR's earlier inequality reports, we also know that there are differential impacts, and we are not able to consider in the way we lay standards and policy differential impacts. And I think this is important, that despite all these years of knowing, for example, agriculture, women who work in agriculture often are pregnant, and of course childbearing age, are standing in pesticide-ridden fields, and the impact on them is very different than the impact might be on other men. So this inability in our standards to look at impacts which are differential. For example, how does the lead in the air impact children with lower nutritional status and have higher exposures because they live in poor housing? So these kinds of differential impacts, when we have this very technical way of looking at standards, and I've been part of many, many regulatory committees, that we don't factor in this differentiation of how the vulnerable, and of course, vulnerability is a very complex thing, and I'm sure we'll discuss it in a bit, but the vulnerable populations or vulnerable ecosystems are impacted. The third thing I've seen is that we are looking very closely at human systems, but we're not looking at ecosystems, though they interact very closely. I'll give you 2 specific examples. When we looked at microplastics in the river Ganga, we did a year-long study on that, and we found huge amounts of microplastics, and we found them also in the fish. And we also did an earlier study to look at mercury in the fish, right? But these are not part of how mercury and microplastic standards, of course, microplastics don't have standards as yet, but how mercury standards are being made, which become the regulatory norm, how we deal with the economic issues, which deal with industry and the manufacture and production and mining of these products. So these kinds of differentiations we have to somehow bring back into the system when we are thinking of the Anthropocene or thinking of ecosystems. How do we factor that in, I think, is a big challenge. So besides these 2 things of human systems and social hierarchies, of factoring them in, which is very much part of the framework of the Anthropocene, because as we know in the Anthropocene, one of the big debates is that not all humans are causing the Anthropocene and not all humans are suffering because of it. There's a differential of the power of, and there are a lot of figures now, there are a lot of research papers about the power of the corporate, if I may say that, in how small number of capital intensive ventures hold the power over the rest of the population, and which of course we'll speak later about the idea of agency. So I would say that 2 things in this. Firstly, of course, we've had an impact because I think by focusing on toxics at a time when nobody was thinking of toxics is a little scientific issue. It requires a little translation. And we see it as an issue of democracy and rights. So to focus on that and to bring it to public realm was itself a big challenge for us, because how do we get into this area? But secondly, over the years, I think in one way we've been very successful. In another way, I feel that we have a huge mountain to climb. And the drivers have been people. The drivers, I'll give you a very small example. When we were working in lead in paints, and this is about, we started doing this in 2015, and now we have new standards in India, which are as per the WHO standard. We had no standard. We had 1,000 ppm standard of paints then. Now, we found that mothers of children started calling up companies, telling them that we don't want to buy your paint because you have too much lead in them. Why didn't you tell us how much lead there is? So, you know, this kind of activation of a consumer citizen is something with research which asks the right question is able to do. And we see ourselves as that activation, that activator, that public interest activator to give people the capacity to ask the right questions. I don't know how much more you want me to say, but you know that's just one point I'd just like to add, that for my work as an artist on the ground with fishing communities, I've worked with fishers in South India for over 5 years. Then I had occasion to work in Havana. Then I also worked with people who are dealing with traditional water harvesting systems in Jaisalmer. And of course, you see that at one level, there are policies, there are technological interventions. We have the largest canal, one of the largest canals in the world, coming from the Indus down to the deep desert, almost 600-kilometer Indira Gandhi Canal, which is meant to green the desert, started in the 50s. But you see that on the ground, these systems are not connected with traditional water systems. So traditional water systems, which have known how to trap even the few millimeters of rain which come in that area every year into big ponds of rain, and I've seen it with my own eyes, they have no connection with the technological intervention we have. So somehow we're not speaking to each other. And the second thing we don't realize, how people self-organize. So while the policy is being made, people are busy organizing, coping. And we are not able to see the structures through which people self-organize. And of course, people take all this into account and have a way, it's like stock markets take everything into account and then self-organize into what the price should be. People are all constantly self-organizing. So I think a more human-centric approach, looking at the questions which ask about how people are interacting with the social systems, takes us out of the realm of only natural science, but into the social sciences and the humanities, or what we call them, and to bring them together in some ways to look at this complexity we are seeing today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ravi, and your points around the fact that often policy is quite distant from actually how people are leading their lives and how they are mobilizing and activating on their own account anyway, and how do we bring that closer together. Dr. Thomas, I'd love to go to you next. You're a historian of Japan who has also been working closely with the scientists of the Anthropocene Working Group. So our first question to you, Dr. Thomas, in considering our global environmental challenges, why have you found the concept of the Anthropocene more useful than the rubric of climate change? Dr. Thomas, you're on mute.
It's really lovely to be here this evening. Hello to everyone. Thank you for having me. Like many of us here, we have been involved in these issues for a long, long time. And it took a long, long time to get the phrase climate change on people's maps. So you might wonder why we wouldn't just go forward with this term. And I and obviously the people at the UN Human Development Commission are now turning to the Anthropocene because it is a fuller, more three-dimensional concept to understand our difficulties. And one of the things that I have watched is as the idea of climate change has become more acceptable in public discourse. It has been narrowed even further. It used to be generally greenhouse gas emissions. It has become more and more a term that refers to emissions from transportation and energy production. And it leaves out, for instance, the very important factor of emissions from agriculture. And if we take into account the emissions from agriculture, which are over 25% of emissions, then even if we cut all non-food production emissions, we still wouldn't get to 1.5 degrees, as the Paris Agreement says. And it's worse than that, I think. Now that we're focusing on climate change, a lot of big-shouldered players are coming in and they're saying, I can fix this problem, including people like Bill Gates, who helpfully begins his book by describing himself high in the skies over Africa, looking down at all the darkness down there. And he has a moment of epiphany that he, Bill Gates, can bring light to all the little children who cannot read. And of course, he is heavily invested in renewable energy. And he presents this as a problem that can be solved. And it's a one-dimensional problem. He doesn't ask about the materials footprint that Tasneem was talking about. And he doesn't ask about the dangers to biodiversity by a nighttime that's lit up by lights. And when I think about that in Africa, for instance, turtle doves migrate from South Africa 300 or 400 miles a night across the entire continent of Africa to arrive ultimately in the UK for Christmas, which is why one of the 12 days of Christmas involves turtle doves, or at least it used to. And so what we get when we frame this problem in terms of climate change alone is an even bigger problem in the future. The loss of biodiversity, the greater and greater amounts mined. And that's why the Anthropocene, which takes into account all dimensions of our problems, and the social dimension as well, allows us to think about this not as a problem that can be solved, but as a predicament we need to navigate with grace. And I think the difference is essential. Solutions promise that we can continue with a kind of utopia of human development that Hari was talking about, growth, 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 just now call it green. But if we talk about the Anthropocene, then we have to start considering things like living more slowly, like degrowth, like focusing on equality and the kinds of things that Ravi was just discussing. So I think the conceptual shift that the Human Development Commission has made toward the Anthropocene is very, very exciting. And you've taken a real leadership position in doing that, and I'm grateful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas, and we agree that the need to think a lot more holistically about the interconnected risks that result in this is certainly what we need for all our collective futures. Thank you so much for that. It's with great pleasure I now move to Dr. Guinto. Dr. Guinto is the director of the Planetary and Global Health Program and is a member of various international organizations. We would love for you to help us make the connection between planetary health and human health. In the context of the pandemic, Dr. Guinto, we saw a tremendous impact on mental health. Can you tell us a little bit more about the you think we will face in human health because of deteriorating planetary?
Thank you very much, Arathi, and to our colleagues for having me in this very important discussion. And first, I just want to reinforce and echo the many important points that have been raised so far by Tasneem in her introductory lecture or talk, and of course to my co-panelists. Just very briefly, as you mentioned, Arathi, I'm wearing two hats, one from the Philippine side, the Planetary and Global Health Program at the St. Luke's Medical Center. And then the other one is with the Sunway Center for Planetary Health, which is a very new center that we just established a few months ago. We're a very young yet very energetic group of colleagues, and we're really dedicated to advancing the field of planetary health here in Asia and the Pacific. And some of our colleagues in the audience might be wondering, what is planetary health? So I want to define that first. As we know, there is this earlier concept of public health. Public health aims to improve the health of human populations. But over the past century, we've seen tremendous progress in public health. We've added 25 to 30 years to the average life expectancy of the world. But unfortunately, we've accomplished that at the expense of the planet. We've been putting food on the table in every household in the world, but at the expense of natural ecosystems because of our irresponsible food production, agricultural systems. We've seen urbanization on the rise, bringing more opportunities to people around the world, but at the expense of encroachment of surrounding ecosystems, and also the creation of pollution to air, water, and land. And so the public health approach, while still important, especially in this day and age of COVID, is not anymore sufficient to ensure the health and well-being of the human civilization, not just today, not just in the next several years, but in decades and centuries to come. We cannot anymore advance the health of people while ignoring the health of the planet. And that's how the concept of planetary health was born. And as a physician myself, I always say I now have two patients, people and planet. And so how does planetary health feature in this upcoming Human Development Report? Of course, I would love the concept of planetary health to be front and center in this report. And planetary health also acknowledges the huge and wide uncertainties that the future is bringing. We are uncertain about the health of the human population. We are also uncertain about the welfare of human societies. We are also uncertain about the future of our planet. And hopefully planetary health as this new lens, as this new compass, will help reduce that kind of uncertainty that we are all experiencing. And that's why in planetary health, we really embrace uncertainty and surprises and emergence, and we're using a very transdisciplinary approach. Planetary health is so important to be left to the hands of doctors alone, like me. We need the collaboration of social scientists like Professor Thomas. We need artists like Ravi. We need everybody, economists, ecologists, climatologists to be part of this endeavor. Now I'm going to link it with mental health because you asked me that very specific question. And I also appreciate Tasneem showing that part where, unsettled lives means that people are also having unsettled and uncertain mental health situation. Mental health and mental health problems have been existing for decades, but it's only in recent years, if not the recent decade, when there has been a growing attention on mental health. The WHO has, over the past decade, established a very strong global mental health program. Mental health advocacy organizations have arisen over the past several years, especially those that are driven by young people. The young people today are the generation that are more comfortable and more open to discussing this issue that has been stigmatized for many, many years. And of course, as you've mentioned already, COVID-19 has really put a spotlight on mental health, which is a pandemic in itself, happening alongside COVID-19. But what we are not talking much yet about is that the mental health of the global population is driven by multiple stressors. It's not just the pandemic. It's not just, economic instability and poverty and chronic poverty and different forms of discrimination, racial discrimination, gender discrimination, but also climate change and the different environmental pressures that we are already witnessing now. There's a growing science around the nexus of climate change and mental health. The field of environmental psychology is playing a key role in this. And, I happen to be part of the advisory board of this new initiative called Climate Cares, which is headed by the Imperial College London. And this initiative has been developing this new research arena. We just launched a report in June that documents and synthesizes this current state of evidence on the nexus of climate change and mental health. And we in the Philippines have for many decades already acknowledged this nexus. When an extreme weather event like a typhoon and an intense flooding happens, what happens afterwards? You have communities, vulnerable communities, especially women and children and people with disabilities and farmers and fisher folk being affected by these disasters, not just physically, but also mentally. You must have heard of this concept or this condition called post-traumatic stress disorder. And this definitely disproportionately affects children. Some of them are able to overcome this situation in weeks, in months, but some of them carry, the trauma even for years, even up until adulthood. And this is certainly going to be a continuous problem as the climate continues to worsen and becomes more unstable and more of these extreme weather events do occur within this century. But also, it's not just the abrupt disasters brought about by climate change that will bring about mental health distress and all these other forms of psychological sequelae. There's also what we now call the slow onset effects of climate change. So it's not about, having a disaster, but when temperatures continue to rise, when our croplands continue to be unable to produce food, and if families living in the coastlines are seeing their houses being inundated because of continuous sea level rise, that also generates a different kind of mental health distress brought about by climate change. And there are new terminologies that have been introduced over the past decade. You might have heard of climate anxiety that is caused by, for instance, direct experience of climate change and its effects, but also by just seeing climate change in the front page of the newspaper or looking at photos and videos in social media, because unfortunately, not many people in this day and age read newspapers, but they get their information from social media. There's another concept called climate grief. When you have loved ones who have been affected by climate change, or your house has been, as described usually by people in the coastlines, swallowed by the sea, by the ocean. That creates a certain kind of grief that is driven by changes in the ecology. And solastalgia as well. Again, this distress, caused by this sense of loss, not driven by any other factor, but by climate change and ecological changes. So, this is a growing science, and I hope that this will be reflected in the upcoming Human Development Report. And lastly, I think when we talk about climate change, planetary health, mental health, but also this concept of uncertainty, we need to make sure that we are bringing together different kinds of perspectives, not just in terms of disciplines, but in terms of geography and culture. You must have seen, especially in social media, this growing momentum around decolonizing everything. We need to decolonize health. We need to decolonize development. We need to decolonize climate change. We need to decolonize science and education. And I hope that this report will try to capture different ways of knowing, different epistemologies, and hopefully we can develop and contribute more Asian perspectives, non-Western perspectives in terms of how we understand, psychology and how it's impacted by climate change and its different forms of uncertainty, but also, not just in terms of the diagnosis, but also in the solutions. What are these non-Western solutions that we can promote and introduce to build, not just physical, but also psychological resilience in an era of uncertainty and climate change and planetary health? I'll stop there and I look forward to our conversation.
Dr. Guinto, thank you so much. I was really resonating with a lot of the points that you said, in particular, climate grief. One of my favorite authors, Dr. Britt Ray, actually talks a lot about this. And certainly I would 100% agree with this idea of embracing a wider pluriverse of knowledge in terms of where we seek and where we recognize expertise. And I know certainly for our HDR colleagues, they are certainly very, very keen to embrace different schools of thought and are much more diverse than what we've traditionally explored in terms of the epistemology of knowledge. So thank you, Dr. Renzo. That was really great. Dr. Nansai, I want to come to you because there's a question actually from our audience over to you. So I'm just going to read this out from Bishwa Tiwari. So Bishwa asks, thank you, Professor Nansai, for the wonderful presentation. It is good to know that there is good effort on recycling of waste in Japan. But you also mentioned that there is no decrease in consumption in Japan. We know from the second law of thermodynamics that all waste cannot be recycled. In view of this, do you think that there is a need for reducing consumption in a developed society like Japan? And how would you react to a provocation such as that?
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much for making giving me a question to my presentation. Yes, unfortunately we can't beyond the second law of the thermodynamics for recycling. That's why we can't get the 100% of the recycling, even though using the latest or even though the future super duper technologies. Yeah, but basically I'm very much agree the developed country society has to reduce the consumption itself dramatically to attain at least the 1.5 degrees or even the 2 degrees world. Yeah, because I think there are many people has already known the IPAT equation, the impact equals the population times affluent and times technology. Yeah. Then as as indicated in the overview slide of the new report, so affluent is the consumption affluent. Yeah, that's why even though Japan has introduced many technologies to promote recycling. Also, our society have been educated very much about the importance of recycling. Even though they're very small kids, okay, recycling is important. They know that. But but still, we are chasing the growth of GDP. Then, of course, the growth of GDP. They increase the consumption of material. Therefore, unfortunately, the speed of the technological development is slower than the speed of our consumption. Yeah. Therefore, now without the considerable reduction of the resource consumption itself, without any sacrificing our satisfaction in life, without such the paradigm shift, I think we can't reach to reach to the world with the stable climate condition. That's why. So I'm belonging to the UNEP resource panel. The UNEP resource panel, yeah, how say they're saying many times the importance of the resource use mitigation, yeah, and the decoupling. Then of course in the long history, the developed country has, I'll say, stocked many materials in the society already. Yeah, that's why the developed countries would be, I'll say, would do the developed country has a potential to circulate the such stocked the resources within the society. Therefore, basically, developed countries have the potential to reduce the use of the new material, how to say, mined material from the earth. Yeah. Now, that's why the developed country has the responsibility, also potential, yeah, to reduce the material consumption drastically. But yeah, sorry, that's my simple reaction. Maybe you know that already. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Nansai. Ravi, we'd like to come to you. There is a question from the audience member, but actually I want to ask you another question before we go there, because it links kind of nicely. I mean, you talked a lot, and something I think really resonated with all of us listening to you was the mobilizing of action, the self-mobilization of action from community of individuals themselves. How do you rate the importance of that individual action, I guess, in comparison to the global action or the coordinated action of government coordinated action of government and institutions and private sectors? Do you feel like one, I mean, I know the answer is not a binary answer, but how important, I guess, I suppose, is that individual action, that individual contribution, that self-mobilization of communities, of individuals towards this effort?
It's extremely important, but it's not as straightforward as we'd like it to be. For example, not all individuals have the freedom to act in the way they want to. For example, women don't have the same voice in communities, and especially women of lower caste in India, for example, may not be seen at all. So you'll find men representing them. So you really do not know that what is the individual voice which is being reflected in the social structures and the communities. Very often in communities such as the ones which live in landscapes, it becomes a community action. So I'll give you two examples. One is that when after tsunami in the fishing community, there was a lot of money came into South India, right? Because of aid and all that. And many fishers then made collaboration with businessmen and bought large boats and large engines. So large boats and large engines could go 20, 30 kilometers in the sea. And the paddle boats they were using earlier could only go 2 or 3 kilometers. Now, within that community, those people who could access that technology suddenly had a big edge. They were before that all equal in the terms of their fishing footprint in a sense. But now the people who were not able to access that for whatever reasons, they then started falling out of the community. They started doing other odd jobs. They could not sustain themselves. The fish catch went down. So it was an unintended action, but it was because we don't understand how communities really absorb technology. We say it's a good thing to give technology, give money, but how is it absorbed? It normally flows into certain structures which are pre-existing and do not counter those structures. So I think at the bottom end, that becomes a problem. Same thing I saw in Jaisalmer, to keep to those examples which I was giving earlier, that the community started organizing themselves when the canal water was not accessible to them because it was only a certain area. They didn't have the sub canals for the water to come. So they started organizing themselves around the traditional systems, and then to access the water, and that because that's the only way they could survive. So they became almost like two parallel systems which are happening, and the agency to, or the ability to impact the other systems does not exist with them. The third thing I'd like to say is that this is also a systemic issue of voice and agency. I think you're reflecting. For example, I see a lot of fishers in the beach using PVC sheets for their thatch roofs. Earlier, they were using natural materials, now use PVC plastic sheets, which, as we know, in the sun becomes highly toxic. It emits all kinds of pollutants, etc. But the question is, because the whole skill set and the economy of thatch roof is disappearing, you can't find people who make them. What choice do they have? So the choices which are presented to individuals are getting limited because of systemic changes. You don't have the kind of change. So in one sense, a free choice. In another sense, you have a very limited choice which is given to them. The third thing, and close with this, is that there are multiple things happening at the same time. For example, on the beach, again, sticking to that example, the beach is corroding because a new seawall has come up upstream of the sea, so the sand is changing. Without a landing beach, the fishermen can't fish because the landing beach is critical to them bringing the boats in. There are new concrete structures coming up as new tourism is coming in. And because now new tourism, land prices are going up on the beach, so people are forced to sell their land, or they find it more profitable to sell their land. The fish catch is decreasing because of the trawlers and the deeper accessing boats. And their local administration access is very divided, depends on the party preferences, on which party you belong to. So when you have this host of sea of changes happening at the same time, you kind of lose agency, individual agency. We do not know what to start protesting against. Where should you write the letter that I don't want this? What is it you don't want? The systems, everything is changing around them. And they are just being swept with the change. And then this idea of individual agency or even community agency becomes really difficult to think about, because what are you acting against?
That is such a pivotal point, I think, and often not really considered through those nuances and those lenses that you pointed out. And I also really liked that you talked about caste, because often in sort of broad brushstrokes of conversation around inclusion and diversity, we make these categorizations of race and gender, etc., but we don't actually, level it down further to talk about issues like caste, like class, which plays very pivotal influences on our social structures, but don't often get named for what it is. Thank you so much, Ravi. So fascinating. Dr. Thomas, I'd like to come to you next, if that's possible. Dr. Thomas? I'm not sure if Dr. Thomas is still with us, but I might come then to you, Dr. Guinto. In terms of the discussions around, the different discussions and the threads that you were pulling out earlier, even between mental health, planetary health, do you feel that these connections are being made at the moment in the sort of national policy cycle? Are we seeing that those threads coming together? And if so, what if so, or if not so, what do you think needs to be done in this area for countries in the Asia Pacific region to enhance and amplify it a little bit more?
Thank you, Arathi, for that question. I mean, I think there are a lot of parallel discussions. This is my observation. We in the global health sector, for example, of course, we're all very much focused on the COVID response, especially the growing vaccine inequality in the world, which now has generated another variant of concern, Omicron. So I hope that everybody is, not taking this for granted. Let's protect ourselves from this new variant as it continues to spread. And then in other sectors, there are also parallel conversation about, tackling the climate crisis, or, urbanization, or addressing socio-economic inequalities. And so I think we're not there yet in terms of bringing everybody together and having a shared vision for our future and for the future of, our civilization. I think in planetary health, we always say, we're not just dealing with the health of people who are living today. We are actually thinking about the health of people who will be living 100 years from now. And that's why we cannot anymore just focus on our traditional health sector activities, because we know that 80% of our health is actually produced outside of our sector. And so we need to really be working with the climate sector, the energy sector, the economic sector, etc. For example, think about the recent COP26 in Glasgow. And we always say, in COP26, after 26 years of negotiating, health now has its own pavilion, and it has a 2-week-long series of health-related activities. But actually, I think that's not really a true cause for celebration, because we're still a pavilion and we're still a side event, and health is not yet at the center of the climate negotiations. And maybe we should do better. Maybe in COP27, we should bring more health folks around the negotiating table, and more young people and children to be around the negotiating table. Because as we've seen in COP26, that young people are, have been invited to give statements, they're protesting outside, but they're not yet inside the negotiating table. Same with indigenous communities. They're having their own side event outside, and they're not yet, at the center of the debate. And so hopefully in the years to come, if we really want an integrated approach that brings all of these issues together, we will really break the silos and, bring the different perspectives and sectors and disciplines and generations, young people, most especially, who will be the ones bearing the brunt of these uncertainties that we've been talking about. We want them to be on the seat, or to have a seat or many seats around the discussion table and the policy table. I think finally, what we're not talking about much is about the current configuration of the economy. And actually, during the time of COP26, I wrote an op-ed in Project Syndicate. It's about the economy that planetary health requires. Because what we've been relying on for 26 years is, countries making promises and voluntary commitments. But we've never really talked about the economic system that creates all these human and planetary problems in the first place. This uncertainty that we are confronting, this is really, created by our economic system. That is create equalities, persuaded the elite. I think you lost me. Am I back?
Yes, you fizzled out for a little bit, but yes, now you're back. Thank you.
Yes, I think it's my connection. What was the last word that I said? So I'll remember my train of thought. Oops, Arathi, you're muted.
The last thing I heard, where you were talking about siloed discussions still at COP, whether it's young people, whether it's indigenous people, still being sort of left on the outside of the discussions and not central.
Awesome. And what I also was adding, towards the end, was that we are also not yet talking about the real cause or root cause of all these issues, of all these uncertainties, which is the economic model in which we all operate. And I actually, as I was saying a while ago, I wrote an op-ed for Project Syndicate a few weeks back during the COP. I mean, we're all looking at these negotiations, but we're not talking about the real economy that drives these planetary health challenges and the uncertainties that people today and people in the future children of the world will be confronting and facing firsthand. And so what is this economy that we need in order to reduce these uncertainties that we've been talking about, to protect the planetary boundaries and to advance human health and well-being and flourishing? And I'm not sure if you've heard of this concept of the donut economy that is developed and conceptualized by the British economist Kate Raworth. And I wonder if this Human Development Report will touch on alternative visions for the future economy, an economy that reduces the uncertainties, but also promotes health and well-being and preserves planetary integrity. So that's, I guess, a suggestion for the report. Thank you. Arati, you're muted again.
Almost 2 years of being on Zoom and I still keep doing that. So thank you so much, Dr. Guinto. Colleagues, participants, as we are opening up for Q&A from the audience, please either feel free to put your hand up to ask our panelists any questions. For the moment, we have lost one of our panelists, Julia, but we're hoping that she'll come back again soon. Tasneem, I do see we've got a few questions here in the chat, but Tasneem, I do see that you have your hand up, and I think one of these questions are probably best placed for you, actually. But over to you first, Tasneem.
Thank you so much, Arati. Thank you so much, colleagues. It's been such a fascinating discussion. I've enjoyed so much. I want to say, Professor Guinto, when you were talking about the post-traumatic stress disorder and the climate grief, I could very much relate to it. Today at dinner time, we were watching that movie Wall-E from Disney. I don't know if you have seen. My 5-year-old was looking at the world has come to an end. There is only trash all around. There's only a survivor, which is a robot. And he's very lonely. He has only a single friend, the cockroach. So my 5-year-old was feeling very sad. And he was not happy watching this movie. And he was saying, why doesn't he have a friend? So I just wanted to share that experience. I thought it was so appropriate for the discussions we're having. I wanted to ask a question for you, Ravi. And I really resonated with some of the things you said. I felt we need to highlight this in our HDR in terms of how you were emphasizing on the differential impacts it is having. I think this is very important, as you saw in our inequality report. And you mentioned something about how human systems are interacting with these social systems, and there are some missing elements, right? We are having some kind of siloed interventions, but we don't see this connection of how people connects with this kind of materials. We don't experience it. It's material-based, something it's managed by the departments, right? So we are not, as individuals, handling it. We're not seeing it, right? The private sector produces it, we consume it, and then it goes to waste. So I was wondering if you could share some experiences through your NGO work or other work that you have done for this very long time in the country, is what can we do to enhance and much more strongly link this interconnection between human systems and this social systems, as you were saying.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Tasneem. It's a preeminent question because it goes to my mind, to the heart of the matter. I was fortunate to be part of the first India resource panel to look at resource efficiency and circular economy, which Professor Getse is an expert on. And one thing we noticed there was that we are looking at materials outside of human systems. So for example, in the waste sector in India and many developing countries, there's a large informal economy which constantly interacts with waste. So waste is not a material outside of the human interaction system. But the way we think of efficiency of waste, of material flows, the human system is brought in as a second thought, as an outside idea. So it really has to, even when we're looking at the UN International Resource Panel report, they're talking of availability of materials. Now, many of these materials are not available in that sense because they're below forests, ecosystems, or there are people living on them, or they're part of indigenous communities, etc. So their presence does not make them available. Now, we cannot think of the material world separate from the human world because it does not exist. Of course, it exists on its own terms. The earth exists without us. But from our social perspective, the way we interact with it, it is that interaction which is very underplayed or underemphasized. It'll require a lot of change in the way we even think of, for example, our norms and regulatory and policy. As I said, I have not come across one regulatory body, and I was fortunate to participate in them because I'm trained as an engineer, which has a social scientist on it. It'll have at best a health specialist, at best now. 20 years back, it will not even have that. But we have nobody who comes from anthropology, social sciences, or even economics. We have only economics in terms of costing and pricing, but not how economic systems interact. So the first thing would be just to broaden that when we make norms, because norms are drive industry, norms drive industrial flows, the standards and norms which we create, which creates the basic ways in which things are triggered off at a systemic level. Those norms require a different kind of input and a different kind of ability to do that. So even if you have a regulatory body, which is, for example, doing air standards, why not have somebody who understands the social structures of exposures, not only the technical stuff? You will automatically know that it's hard to think of air standards in this linear way. Maybe you need 3 or 4 standards. Maybe you need 3 or 4 accountabilities. I'm not saying don't have standards, but the kind of standards and how you differentiate between them will change. If you're looking at waste recycling, we cannot say that the two things which stop circular economy and waste recycling, one is what should we do with the human informal sector? The second is what about toxicity? Now, so because you cannot recycle toxic materials because it gets dispersed. So what we consider as bottlenecks are actually realities, system realities. And we think of them as something we need to bring from the outside and solve them separately. No, they have to be solved as part of a system reality. So we think realities of material flows, but we don't think realities of these complexities. So let's make our norms, even our scientific norms, much more real and complex. They might have a different shape. Some could be normative, some may not be normative, could be suggestive. We have to find a different ways of doing it. So, and I'm just ending with saying that you see the number of cases today in environmental courts in India. Many of them are because of the conflicts caused by what the law requires and the way they live. It's just a conflict. I mean, you cannot force people to live in a certain way because that's the way they live. So we have to recognize this and let the law reflect, the normative standards reflect that. This is one of the big questions when we talk of multi-species justice. The idea of agency of what is an ecosystem degradation? How do we account for ecosystems preservation in the multi-species world of the Anthropocene? This is a big question. It's a legal question because currently the legal structures are based only on the idea of the anthropogenic, the human justice. And justice is a very complex word. How do we think of ecosystems? So when we talk of interactions, we are actually at the cusp of reflecting in a completely different sphere. And I think it's a good starting point for somebody like this, for an organization or for the report like the Human Development Report, because it borders between society and science in a sense, and all kinds of sciences. So it's not pure academia, you know. So you have the agency to push that in terms of policy thinking. That's what I'm interested as an individual, as an organization. How do you change policy to reflect the realities of societies rather than being normative from the way we desire it to be, from all these problems of inequity and caste and differences start coming in. And we separate science from society, in a sense. Because, you know, I've been constantly asked, I did edited volume of climate change for Rutledge recently, and constantly ask the question that how do we communicate climate change? And I keep saying that why do we need to communicate climate change if it's omnipresent? Everybody's sensing climate change. It's the way we have defined climate change, the way we have constructed the materials and the science for climate change, that it alienates the fishermen from imagining what these figures mean. If we had a cooperative idea of how to think of climate change as part of a scientific understanding, then we will not have to explain it to him. It'll be part of the understanding of what is happening. So this separation we have to narrow, and the separation can only be narrowed if we look at realities, how people live, which is complex, but that should not deter us from, because we're living in very complex moments.
Thank you so much, Ravi. Thank you so much, Tasneem, for that question. I think, that speaks to a real fault line that we experience as humanity. I think often we make language about very complex things, I guess perhaps through the lens of unintended arrogance, but we make it so exclusionary to so many people, and therefore the individual doesn't see themselves reflected in that, and therefore they don't engage. And I really, and thank you, Tasneem, for asking such a wonderful question. But that last point of yours, Ravi, really resonated, that the bridging together of these different elements so that everybody can see themselves as part of that, not feeling violently excluded from it. Tasneem, I actually want to come to you now, as there's a question that's been posed in the chat that I think would be wonderful for you to answer. So Malashri has said, the Gender Inequality Index is an important section within human development reports. Since COVID-19, there are several reports published by UN Women, UNICEF, ILO on the impacts of COVID-19, severely backtracking the gender equality gains hard-earned achieved over decades. COVID-19, as we now know, has pushed millions of marginally poor, below the poverty line, and already poor people in food insecurity and debt traps. Poorest girls in the regions have been forced to drop out of schools permanently and subjected to child marriages and abuse. The impacts on gender inequality spans across the SDGs. Nothing much seems to be done for enhancing investments for women and girls or institutionalizing gender-responsive budgeting for disaster risk management, especially in the context of the pandemic. What can these consultative sessions that we're doing for the HDR do for ensuring that gender issues are addressed seriously, especially in terms of budget allocations for women's livelihoods, food security, participation, and leadership? That's a very, very long question, but I think, Malashri, unless you want to put your hand up, the way I could summarize that is, how do we ensure that these consultations do take and do address gender issues, and particularly around the budgeting and financing around that? And I might put that both to Tasneem or Harry, if either of you want to jump in for that. Thank you.
Maybe I can start. So thank you for the question. In our last Human Development Report, we reflected about the effects of COVID on women, and we were documented the impact with the data already available. So something that I take the opportunity to announce is that in January, our office is going to be releasing a special report on human security. In that report, there is a chapter that stresses the importance of inequalities as an important component, not only determinant, but an important component of human insecurity, and in particular, gender inequality. So in that report, we will be providing new analysis and also some recommendations that some of them go exactly in this direction, and how to strengthen the agency of women, in particular in this context of interlinked threats that have to do with the pandemic, but also with Anthropocene risk, with settings of conflict. So I think there will be a lot of useful material that you will find in this report that hopefully on the second part of January will be released. On top of that, the question is about the indices. We are working with UN Women on a new generation of gender indices. So this is likely to be released on March. Unfortunately, for some of the indicators, we might not be able to reflect the COVID reality because, indicators are hard to collect, and we try to standardize across countries. But I think very soon we will be able to see very clearly the effects with very robust data, and therefore this is going to be also an important tool for policy making. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harry, for that fantastic response. Tasneem, I'm not sure if you want to come in, or if not, we can go to the next question.
Perhaps we can also take some questions from the floor. We can ask colleagues to raise hands if they would like.
Okay, and whilst we're waiting for colleagues to raise their hands, thank you, Renzo. You've put some great links in the chat there, as well as a fantastic, I think it's a film that you've done, your doctoral dissertation in film form. So thank you so much, Renzo, for that. Fantastic links there for all our participants in case you want to look at it. Whilst we're waiting for participants to put their hand up, I will keep asking questions. Dr. Nansai, I'd like to come back to you. In your work, in the work that you're seeing and that you're working on, and in your research in Japan, I'm wondering how you draw the link, or if you're drawing the link between what you're doing and then this concept of uncertainties, and whether it actually is relevant for that work, or it just doesn't resonate at all. I suppose the question here is the proposed characterization of ongoing uncertainty actually of value to the work that you're doing and that you're seeing unfold in your space in Japan?
Okay. Thank you very much. It's very much the hard question to reply quickly. Yeah. So I'm working on the environmental system analysis on the material consumption and the stock flow of the resources in the world in Japan. So so for example, in terms of climate change, so the many scientists has already showed the pathway to avoid the climate the crisis. Of course, we know that those are very difficult because that the solution requires us to change our consumption pattern, our lifestyle dramatically. It's very hard, but luckily we have a solution scientifically. Okay, even though the possibility is very ambiguous, but so in the sense of what I am doing is very much related to the reduction of the uncertainty in for the future. Yeah. So sometimes when we see the impact of the environmental changes, so we tend to think just about uncertainty and the dark future, but we can't forget we have also a solution. That we know the pathway to the for the transition. Yeah, that's why so now currently, for example, my research groups show how much we should reduce the metal stock in society to achieve the 2 degrees world. So in our analysis, so currently the high the income country uses the 12 ton metal per person as a stock. Like, for example, including the metal in the car, including metals in the house and the road and bridges. Anyway, our life, the life in the developed country, how they use 12 ton or the per person metal. But in order to achieve the 2-degree world, so if we don't get the massive of the CCS technology in the world, so we have to reduce that weight to the 7 ton metal per person as a stock. It's almost the half. Yeah, but it's a very difficult goal. But we know that at least a goal. Then we can think about we can think the solution to achieve that by anyway, for example, if maybe that you have the car, then how many persons usually they use the car? But if we change the number of persons of the car to double or triple, yeah, we can reduce anyway the metal stock in the society per person gradually. But anyway, that's why what I'm doing as a work is contributing to the reduced uncertainty for the world. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nansei. Pardon me. I would love to ask one last question to our panelists, and then we might actually draw this to a close a little bit earlier. Again, participants, if there are any questions you would like to ask, please post them in the chat or put your hand up. But in the absence of that, I think I will move us to our final question for the night, which is a general question, and I'm putting this open to all our panelists, wonderful panelists here today. In the light of everything we're talking about, in the light of increasing uncertainty, Anthropocene complexities, all of this that you've so richly discussed today, I think what we now know and what has been critiqued for a while now is that the traditional metrics for measuring what development progress traditionally looks like is out of date. Renzo, you talked about it's often followed a very Western, northern approach of what progress and development looks like. Is this now the time where we can start to push for the next frontier of what is a more appropriate measurement of well-being and development in general? I know how I feel about this, and I'm sure this will spark a lot of conversation, but is this now the time? Is this what our report should be pushing for? And what are those measures? So I'm opening it up to our entire panel, if anybody wants to jump in first on that. Renzo, I'm going to call on you because you were nodding a lot.
Yep, and I'm actually trying to retrieve one website that I would like to also share with you. Sorry for bombarding you with resources or references, because, the quick answer to your question, Arathi, is yes, right? We need new metrics. We need new metrics that not just capture things that have for so long not been captured. For example, health, well-being, the natural, the value of our natural assets, natural capital, but also really reorienting the way we think about the world, the way we think about concepts like development and progress and sustainability. And I just want to share, I'm not sure if you are aware of this website, and it's linked to, my earlier comment about the donut economy. What this group in the University of Leeds in the UK did is they attempted to answer the question, among the world's countries, which one is closest to becoming a donut economy? And so they actually developed these visualizations. They created donuts for, I think, around 100 countries in the world. And so just by looking at this donut, you will be able to know which countries have violated their planetary boundary budget, but also are having shortfalls in achieving the basic social foundations like food, health, energy access, housing, political voice, gender equality, etc. And you can already anticipate that many of the high-income countries have violated the boundaries while achieving the social foundations. And so the major challenge of the big countries is, how do you sustain the high level of human development while at the same time reversing the ecological damage that they have afflicted onto the planet. And then on the other hand, you have the low and middle income countries where, which have not violated any of the planetary boundaries. They're not part of the climate crime that we are facing right now. But unfortunately, they also have an unfinished business to be accomplished, that needs to be accomplished when it comes to the basic social foundations. By the way, the answer of this research group is that the country that is closest to becoming like a donut is a country that is 3 hours away by flight from Manila, which is Vietnam. So if you look at Vietnam, this is a country that has not violated any planetary boundaries, but also have almost achieved the social foundations. But this is just one example, right? This is just one example of how we can measure, quote unquote, progress and development and sustainability in the era of Anthropocene. It's not based on our traditional GDP metric, but it's based on which countries are making their citizens happy and healthy, while at the same time not breaching the ecological boundaries that are able to preserve ecological integrity. I hope that the future human development reports, or maybe we should start thinking, is it just a human development report, or is it, something much broader that brings together the health of people and the health of the planet? I'll stop there, and I congratulate again the organizers for this convening.
Thank you so much, Renzo. And I think also, perhaps your last point, I think, might speak to a little bit of what Ravi talked about earlier, which is around multi-species. Dr. Nansa, you've got your hand up. I'd love to come to you, but Renzo, just before we do that, there's a question in the chat for someone wanting to get your email address. So I'll leave that for you to answer, but Dr. Nansa, to come to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dee. I think the biggest problem is that the increase in the GDP is not in line with what we are looking for now. Yeah, that's our how to say, very critical problem. Renzo mentioned about the donut economy. Yeah, I think we got the how to say, question about the equity issue. And Ravi mentioned about the differential impact of the issues. Maybe, yeah. Therefore, now we have realized that we are not how to say, even though they are increasing GDP, maybe we can't get the things we want to. We know that. Yeah, that's why it will be. Now that the critical chance to reconsider whether GDP GDP is the one of the three pillars of the human development. Currently HDI includes three pillars, basically: the life expectancy and education and GDP, right? They of course still, yeah, the planetary health. We want to be healthy. We want to, I would say, live longer if possible. Yeah, that's why the life expectancy would be key issue, and also education. But the is third pillar GDP still. Yeah. Then there's some question is about the degrowth, growth. Already there. Of course, it's very hard, but yeah, actually, the decoupling and the technology, how to say, they are. I think personally, I think technology development can't solve this issue within the for example 80 years toward 2100. We don't have enough time to achieve that 1.5 degree. That's why. So yeah, we should. It's good time to broad our concept, what we need. Yeah, thank you very much.
There are a couple of people with their hands up. Tasneem, did you want to go next?
Sure, I just wanted to say you asked a very important question, very relevant question. Lots of people have been thinking about it, but I wanted to say that the Human Development Indicator has, when it was first initiated, was brought about with that kind of inspiration to look beyond GDP, which is why we have health and education in it. And last year, we were able to augment that with the Planetary HDI, which looks into the environmental footprint in terms of the emissions that we are doing, as well as the material footprint. But this debate kind of still continues because GDP is still in the HDI metrics, but also GDP is in all countries is a variable that policymakers are pursuing. Important questions obviously are being asked to what extent we should be doing that. The GDP was born after the World War II. In times of depression, to understand how can we create more employment, give some basic meet the basic needs of people. But we have evolved to a very different society from that time. And so there is definitely a lot of interesting debate along that. So let me finish here. And I think we're also coming very close to the end of our discussion. So I want to thank all the colleagues too.
Thank you so much, Tasneem. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you to our fantastic panel presenters, to the HDR team at UNDP.
Arti Bishwa actually has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bishwa.
In case you wanted to take a question, yeah, from the floor.
Sure. Bishwa, I'm sorry I didn't see you. If you would like to ask your question. Bishwar, are you there?
Me? Hello.
Hi, Bishwa. How are
Hi.
you? Your hand up.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Arti. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Bishwa. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for posing that question about the measurement issue. And just wanted to point out that yes, apart from GDP or poverty or other consumption-based measure of well-being, there are other measures like SDI. Last year, we also, as Tasneem said, we have a PSDI, Planetary Adjusted Human Development Index. Similarly, long ago, we have developed the green accounting GDP. But despite these measures are already there in place, I think still GDP or GNI is a dominant measure. So now in today's discussion, actually we are thinking that there is a need for degrowth. There is a need for reducing the consumption. Maybe it's difficult in a very developing society, poor society, but a developed society. If that is the case, then this consumption-based measure of poverty or GDP, I don't think there is a necessity. We cannot evaluate the social or economic progress using this conventional measure. And in my view, I think there is an interaction between the formal values and institution and informal values and institution. Many of these formal policies institutions, they are shaped by the informal values and institution of society. Similarly, the formal values and institution can also change the informal values or thinking of the people. So many times, see, despite so many efforts made in the past, still our, I think those who are the head of state and they still think GDP as a predominant measure. So in order to change their perception that GDP is not actually a realistic measure in today's world, why not to discard GDP as a measure of economic well-being, whether it can be done so. Similarly, like Renzo was pointing about the psychology, all those things, there are several measures. We have happiness index and, gross national happiness powered by Bhutan's king in 1974 or 79. So it's a popular measure, frankly speaking. So one of the dimensions of the 9 domain is psychological well-being. So we are talking about this psychological well-being. And But despite all those efforts, why we are not progressing on those metrics of development? Why still GDP or income-based poverty, consumption-based poverty is still more popular? So in that sense, why not to discard these monetary measure of well-being and move towards some other things? Over to you, Aarti. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Bishwa. And I agree with your last point, and Renzo has also affirmed that. And it's a really good thing. We keep using Bhutan as sort of an extraordinary example, but the GNFH framework has been in place for decades. So why haven't more governments adopted it? I think we've got time. We are about 6 minutes to our closing, so we've got time for one more question.
There's one more. Malashri has her hand up too, I think.
Thank you. So yes, I do see Malashri has her hand up. So Malashri, over to you.
Yes, hi. I have a question that, about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals that, we embarked in 2015, and now we have like 10 more years, and it covers, almost all the aspects I would, see. For example, yeah, it does cover poverty, it does cover food insecurity and health issues, and also, and it has this really very, very kind of intensive metadata for it, and all the indicators and targets, and it just covers like health, education, it covers gender-based violence, it covers climate change issues, urban resilience, water and sanitation. I think most of the components that can make a household or an individual, kind of happy in a welfare society, like, with well-being. So can this be seen as, this framework is already existing, and it is in every country. So I don't know, how does it link up with this? It really needs to link up with this somehow with human development indicators, but SDGs is for the next 10 years. That's the framework which all the national governments, as well as the local, national governments, and the regional entities, everybody is just onto it, and even kind of trying to align their policies and plans as per SDGs. So like, how does it link up with HDI or all of what we are speaking about, the new, creating new systems? And because that's what, countries are supposed to kind of mandatorily kind of report on it, and there's lots of data being generated on it. So how are we really seeing SDGs and this new system we are talking about integrated?
Thank you, Malashri. It's a really good point. It's a really good reflection. I'm not sure if anybody wants to take that, or there's actually a concrete answer to that. But I see I see Renzo has got his hand up. So in the spirit of ensuring that we do close on time, can I come to Renzo and then hand to Harry to close us off for this wonderful consultation? So Renzo, over to you.
Right. Very briefly about the SDGs. Actually, in the planetary health community, initially we were saying, oh, the SDGs is the language of planetary health. But we also acknowledge that the SDGs do not capture the breadth of planetary health challenges that we're seeing today, right? It's 17 goals, but we have more problems beyond that. And a lot of the problems that we deal in planetary health cannot be siloed in 17 goals and 169 targets. They're systems level challenges. And so, what we're now thinking within the Sunway Center is that, because we are a futures thinking center, we are thinking not just for the next 10 years, we're thinking of problems in the next 100 years. What we are now thinking is that we should start talking about what is the post-SDG agenda. And our hope is that the post-SDG agenda is a planetary health agenda that will really lead to the transformation of our economic system, of all our other systems, so that we are able to address these problems at the nexus of people and planet. So, and the other thing, and last thing is, I remember we only started talking about the SDGs in around 2013 to 2015, right? When the MDGs are already about to expire. But we cannot wait for 2029 to talk about the post-SDG planetary health agenda because of the sense of urgency and the tipping points and the deadlines that the planet is giving to us, right? If we only start thinking about the future, close to the ending of the SDGs, that will be too late. And so now we're already starting to think about what's the post-SDG agenda, because the actions will need to happen now, not in 2030 and beyond. Because the planet's health and the people's health, not just for now, but for the future, are at stake. Thank you.
100%, Renzo. And I think this is often what we're learning now in the foresight and futures space, is around how do we ensure that not just our methodologies are futures focused, but that it results in policies that are anticipatory and strategies that are anticipatory and gets us prepared for that much more forward-looking agenda. Ravi, we're going to come to you. I'm going to ask you to keep it brief.
Very brief.
And then we're going to go to Henry. But Ravi, over to you.
Very just two sentences on that. One is that we have all these UN-based goals like SDGs, etc. But in national governance, the governance is still done in traditional lines. So it does not reflect the structure of the complex structure of the SDGs. So the measurements are also done, department-wise or ministry-wise, which are still very traditionally based on economic growth. That's the one thing. And secondly, what was just said, that the planetary ecosystem issues is not fully reflected in the SDGs. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Excellent point, Ravi. And actually, I'll just say one really quick thing, which is even when we look at the Bhutan example, the GNH framework is overarching and fantastic, but the link between that and national planning cycles is disconnected, which I think speaks to what you're saying. Ravi, Dr. Nansai, Dr. Guinto, Dr. Thomas, even though we've lost her, thank you so much for your wonderful contributions. I'm going to wind this section down, and I'm now going to hand this back to Harry to close us off for this wonderful consultation. Thank you, everybody, and good evening.
Thank you, Harati. Just a very quick remark. I think we are very pleased with all the comments. I think this was wonderful. There is a saying that says, if the only thing that you have is a hammer, then you see all your problems like as nails. And so if the only framework that we have is rational choice, and this I'm coming to some of the points that Tasneem raised, then all your solutions, you see them like prices and regulations. So we are going to be expanding our scope, and I'm happy that many of the panelists raised this point. We are going to be considering more the issues of emotions, also the context, the social norms, the culture. So I think we will be exploring much deeper all of these questions, and this is the journey for this report. So I'm going to thank again. This is just the start. We expect to keep engaged with all of you, and yeah. So have a good day and a good night for me.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Can I just intervene for one second, actually, before you guys all go off? First of all, thank you for this wonderful conversation. And then the last question that Arati was posing and the last 20 minutes of the discussion got me a little bit more riled up, actually, about this whole thing, because these issues are very close to my heart. Part of the reason everybody's talking about why do we actually continue to do growth and all these kind of things, right? Part of the reason actually I moved from the IMF to the United Nations was actually so that we can move away from growth and towards sustainable development. And that has actually been the focus of the reports we've been writing at ESCAP now. The first report I wrote was Ambitions Beyond Growth. So it was literally already taking you away from growth. So every narrative is about building a sustainable development path rather than actually emphasizing growth. And the other thing you just mentioned about, like, I think Ravi kind of touched it also. Nobody talks about people actually, when you think, governments do not think in a very holistic manner. So one of the other things that we've been pushing the narrative is that it's a whole of government approach, and you have to sort of mainstream SDGs. It's not SDGs separate from your actual policy making. They are a part of the policy making. It's not an add-on. So we've been actually trying these messages in our reports, and so hopefully it'll come out in your reports as well. So just wanted to actually emphasize that our reports are quite in line with the discussion that was going on for the last 20 minutes. And just to remind all the participants right now, we have another session at 3 p.m. which is on structural transformation and inclusive development. So please join in again then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you very
Everybody,
much.
good night.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.